Each day it is reckoned that the average Londoner is captured 300 times on CCTV. Just one of the examples of the surveillance that many of us experience on a daily basis. And when it comes to online activity, we suspect that that surveillance is even more extreme. So, do we simply throw our hands up and accept this? Or is there a way to fight back and protect our privacy? Stay tuned to Things Visible and Invisible. Gabriel Custodiet is the creator of Watchmen Privacy and Escape the Technology websites. He hosts the Watchmen Privacy Podcast and writes about the loss of societal freedoms, psychological manipulation, and the rise of dystopias through the 20th century into our own 21st century. And he joins me down the line from an undisclosed location. Gabriel, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Sean, it's great to be here. Nothing cheers me up more than speaking about these topics, especially dystopia.
Well, I'm glad it cheers you up, Gabriel, because it gives me nightmares, some of this stuff, and I'm very much looking forward to talking to you about it. But my first question is this. In this age of smartphones, internet, mobile communications, etc., is it possible to have any sort of privacy in the 21st century?
Yeah, I get this question often, and it's usually asked by people who are looking for excuse not to put in the work, right? Um, and my question back to them is, does privacy matter? And almost always they say, yes, it does. In which case, then yeah, you need to take the steps necessary to make it happen. Obviously, we have the extreme end where you go out and you live in the woods. You will certainly have a lot of privacy doing that. But there are a lot of things that we can do while taking advantage of the civilizational and technological fruits of the 21st century and still have a bit of privacy along the way. It just requires that we kind of, and this is really what it boils down to, in my view, understanding some of the systems around us so that we can understand how we can subvert them or distort them in some way. So that's really the key.
That's a really interesting take on it. So, what you're saying, in essence, Gabriel, is that you accept the reality of the world we live in terms of its joined up connectivity, etc. But you're actually able to penetrate those systems so much so that you're able to use them against themselves.
Absolutely. And so the things that I talk about on my show, Watchmen Privacy, is yes, we can talk about privacy and all these fun little encrypted apps and messengers and things of this sort. But we can also, once we take that route, we understand how technology works. We can use that to our advantage. And we can do things like self host data and self host our own library of Alexandria in our own basements and really cool things. Once we understand technology and can master it, it doesn't just give us privacy, it gives us new freedom opportunities and new ownership opportunities and new opportunities to understand the world because in the digital age, we have so many of these things at our fingertips and we can also use it against, our adversaries, I guess you could say. We can do things like open source intelligence gathering, and we can find out a lot of cool things. So it's a double-edged sword, and that just means we want to be using it using it just as competently as our would-be adversaries.
Do you think the average citizen, be it somewhere in Western Europe or across the globe, do you think they're unaware of just how much surveillance there is going on at every single level of their lives?
I think there's some of that. I think there's more just a little bit of willful ignorance, right? And there is will behind willful ignorance. I think that most people, if they're using a phone, if they're using their computer, they have a sense that there's something off, something wrong, right? Like the Matrix, where Neo has this scratching itch that something's off. I think a lot of people realize that and they just don't take the steps to mitigate it. So what I do is I just point these things out for people very plainly, very clearly, not in a pessimistic way. And then we say, okay, so because your internet service provider is providing you internet, they can see your activities. So how do we remedy that? Well, let's learn how to use a VPN, which can hide that internet traffic. So we take simple steps, but the first thing is to understand. And yes, to answer your question, I think that most people are aware of the surveillance. It's just this amorphous thing, right? It's this giant blob, amorphous obstacle. and they're not sure where to start. And of course, as we know, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And once you take that step, you realize that this is really a winnable battle in many ways.
I mean, how much of a growing consciousness is there amongst people who perhaps listen to your podcast or interact with you? Do you think this is a growing sense that people want to take control of their lives, that want to, if you like, break out of the matrix that we are being consigned to?
In my echo chamber on Twitter and elsewhere, people love privacy.
Mm.
My echo chamber is certainly growing. I think that I try to also phrase this in a different way. Yes, privacy. I also think that when we learn these tools, we get cybersecurity, and that's a different proposition for people, right? Protecting your accounts in the age of $10 trillion of cybercrime in the world every year. So when we have some privacy, we have some cybersecurity, and then I add on top of that some digital freedom techniques, right? I think it becomes much more palatable, and I think that there are a lot of people, whether that's in the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency sphere, a lot of these people are seeking alternatives to the collapsing fiat currencies around us. A lot of people are starting to recognize that the always online software as a service that they use, whatever Adobe, Photoshop, and all these things that are dinging their bank account at higher and higher rates when there are free alternatives that are not as surveying and not as controlling of your data. I do think there is an appetite for this, and I do see a growing consciousness of people who are waking up not just to the need for something as kind of specific as privacy, but for the bigger things, right? The bigger things, as Klaus Schwab says, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, right? Just a general pushback against a lot of the surveillance, because it's my view that privacy is really the bulwark against world government, against tyranny, is privacy, right? We have to have that part of our house, that part of our mind, that is free from outside influence, so that we can have these radical thoughts, so that we can think freely, and we can push back against so many of the narratives that are thrust in our face. So it's really part of a process. Privacy is really one part of the process, and I try to keep the whole in mind, though, as well, along the way.
Now, I know, Gabriel, that you write about the loss of societal freedoms. Um, just give us an idea, your take on how we've ended up in this situation. Because when I was growing up, the kind of scenarios that you're discussing and that we know about were in the realm of science fiction, whereas today it's science fact. And it's also a fact of how we're living our lives. Increasingly, it's very, very difficult to operate unless you buy into whatever the systems are that each country determines that you should interact with. How have we ended up here? And do you see a kind of, how can I put it, a sort of master plan behind this, a kind of way in which this is going? And if so, where are we headed for?
Another great question. I wrote a book on this called Privacy and Utopia. I also wanted to investigate, where did we go wrong? What happened? And I think I have a lot of useful thoughts in that book. And I go in a number of different directions. But essentially, in the late 19th century, you have what I call the rise of utopianism. So, because of the rise in the capabilities, the technological capabilities of Europe and North America, we have the rise of railroads, steam engines, we have the rise of the telegraph, and all of these various things that really shrunk the world, right? It really made the world and countries able to be controlled. And it's no mistake that this is the rise of nationalism that would lead to World War One. We have all these tools now, and it becomes possible, right? Long been the it had long been the dream of conquerors to have kind of control systems like this. But if you go back thousands of years ago, Alexander the Great, he doesn't really have a feasible way of conquering the world, right? It's a lifetime journey just to get to India. Whereas you fast forward to 1890, and this is a much more feasible proposition. So around this time in the 1890s, I focus on H.G. Wells in this book. Here's a guy who had the utopian vision and was very technologically minded. And what H.G. Wells basically summarizes of this movement is, we have the technological means to shape the world. Okay. And at this time, they also understood genetics, and surprise, surprise, eugenics also crops up right at this time. We have the understanding of the world. We have a greater understanding of things, and we have the technology to change things. Therefore, we should alter the world. We should change things. We should, as H.G. Wells coins the term, have a new world order. that is technologically run. We have a technocracy, right? That's why I use this word often, of people who are in charge and who are shaping things according to the greater good and through technological means. So this really crops up in the 1890s. I tried to put my finger on the moment it crops up because it's important to trace these things. And of course, we can see that mindset fast forward 100 years later, 125 years later. We can see that same kind of mindset. The big tech companies and the governments that they're friendly with, all these people have a vision of they know what's best, and they're going to tell you what you need to know, what you need to consume, where you need to consume it, what you can and can't say, where you can and can't go, the chilling effect of surveillance. They're the ones who are trying to shape what we're doing to this day. So that's my kind of big take on things.
I mean, of course, H.G. Wells had a particularly pessimistic or gloomy understanding of human beings. I mean, he was a man who believed in science, but his own life was, if that's a testament to that, it wasn't a particularly happy one. He also wrote some very popular science fiction where these were flights of fancy, these were flights of the imagination, obviously suffused with his own philosophical take on the world. But what you're saying, I think, Gabriel, is that this fiction writer, although he did write some nonfiction, but basically a fiction writer, has kind of influenced our understanding of the world. Just, for example, in coining the phrase the New World Order. Is he seriously the sort of genesis for so much of what we're living today? Or is it that people have, I suppose, putting it bluntly, Gabriel, has science taken some of his ideas and played with them? Or were the ideas that he was playing with already in the scientific realm and something which led us to where we are today?
Well, it's kind of a chicken and an egg, right? Do the ideas come first, or do the means come first, or the will? And I don't know. I don't know which came first. What is clear, and here's an interesting example. H.G. Wells in 1905 writes a book called A Modern Utopia. Surprise, surprise! It's actually a dystopia. If you read the book, right? There's control. There's the absence of private property. And H.G. Wells says, "Oh, you wouldn't begrudge a little bit of sharing of your land, right? Yeah, actually, I would. And if you refuse to follow the dictates of this world, which, by the way, has fingerprinting as a way to track people around the world. This was kind of the surveillance technology of the time. So he writes this book about an entire world, which is a utopia in his view, but actually it's a dystopia. That book actually spawned the dystopian genre. Okay. All of the dystopian writers from Orwell to Huxley were responding directly to that book. So he writes this book, and Winston Churchill, who at the time is rising in parliaments and is really the spearhead of the welfare state, he reads this book very sympathetically, and he applauds H.G. Wells for writing this book, and it really inspires Winston Churchill and some of the other um, people in Parliament of the time to, yes, go about and create this welfare state. In my view, kind of the birth of the nanny state, which is kind of part of this apparatus. And so, yes, H.G. Wells was very influential as a writer in inspiring the ideas that people would then take to try to influence the world. And Orwell, George Orwell, no less than George Orwell, has this great line about H.G. Wells. And this is what he says about H.G. Wells. He says, "Thinking people who were born about the beginning of this century are in some sense Wells' own creation. I doubt whether anyone who was writing books between 1900 and 1920, at any rate in the English language, influenced the young so much. The minds of all of us, and therefore the physical world, would be perceptibly different if Wells had never existed." So yes, he was a very influential person, because if you think about the average politician, these are, in my view, very uninspired people, unimaginative people. So for them to get these ideas in science fiction, H.G. Wells is doing all these bizarre experiments. You think of the Island of Dr. Moreau, where because it's fiction, he can talk about animals being experimented on to create these human hybrids and things of this sort. You're not allowed to talk about that in regular discourse, but because he let his imagination go wild, he was able to create these bizarre scenarios that would lead, in my view, to totalitarian governments. If you think about, for example, the Soviet Union and communism, this is really a rejection of human nature. It really takes an imagination. It's really an artistic project to imagine things that really go against human nature. I don't think that the world bears out any of the ideas of communism that they would work. But when you have an imagination of this era, then you can pursue these things that are really bizarre and really lead you, in my view, down some dark paths.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned George Orwell, who's obviously one of the writers who's often mentioned when the word dystopia is being thrown around. The other person, obviously, is Aldous Huxley and his Brave New World. Orwell was writing sort of with a view to some of the political and societal changes brought around by totalitarian governments, be they communism or fascism or whatever. But Huxley was interestingly living in California and was influenced by the kind of freedoms that people were experiencing there. Both seem to be very prescient in terms of where we've ended up. Would you agree that both of them, from different angles, we have sort of created this strange hybrid of Huxley and Orwell coming together in the worst of all possible worlds?
I was having a conversation with a friend just the other day about George Orwell because he was reading some dystopian books, and obviously that one's top on the list. I would agree with Aldous Huxley that Orwell's vision is actually a little bit antiquated. Aldous Huxley wrote his Brave New World, I think, like 15 years before George Orwell published 1984. And he basically said of 1984 that it's a good book, but it misses the point, right? People are not necessarily going to be stomped on. They're going to come to enjoy their servitude. And the way that Aldous Huxley imagines his dystopian Brave New World is that we have this mass consumerism. We have people going on endless drug trips. And if you look at the world today, you can certainly see that the control apparatuses are more, I would say, of that variety, right? Sure, we have governments acting in a totalitarian way, but there are also a lot more subtle psychological operations on our psychology, trying to change our desires and our interests. Drug addiction is huge in the West these days. People are pursuing this soft, this soft life of pleasure, right? They're pursuing pleasure, and in that sense, I think Aldous Huxley's vision of dystopia is a little bit better. Though it's always important to realize that the 1984 scenario is something that we would see in, whether that's in China or the Khmer Rouge or things of this sort. This did appear, and it is a possibility, certainly. But I would have people read Brave New World before they read 1984 in almost all cases.
I mean, both of them are extremely dark reads. I mean, if that's the future, then I'm not surprised that people are escaping or using escapism of whatever sort, be it drug induced or whatever. Um, there's something fundamentally missing in both of these views of not just society, but the human being. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, this is a great point because one of the people pushing back against H.G. Wells and the utopian vision in the early 20th century, and the utopian vision is really this idea that we can change human nature, we can evolve, right?
Mm.
Darwinism comes about during this time where we realize, and H.G. Wells, interestingly enough, is one of the first human beings to get a purely scientific education, and he was actually taught by no less than Darwin's bulldog, right? T.H. Huxley, right? So he has this really evolutionary saturated mind where he thinks, and you can only imagine, right, how that would have affected people, the first people in human history to grow up with this idea of evolution. And he was a staunch atheist. And basically, what H.G. Wells thought is we're just on a journey. We're nothing special. We're on a journey here. And what all we can hope to do is to control these, chimpanzees and send them in a different direction. Now, C.S. Lewis starts to write during this time. And C.S. Lewis has a very different understanding of things. C.S. Lewis believes in human nature. And he's obviously a Christian, and therefore he thinks that there's something special about us. We shouldn't be trying to fiddle with human nature. We're still trying to understand human nature. We don't even understand ourselves and really who we are at a deep level. That should be our concern, not trying to modify the world structure to move man in this direction or this other direction. There's something innate and special to humanity. And that, you're right, that's exactly the debate when we really get down to it. That is one of the bedrock debates that is happening in these last 100 years of which direction we should go. It depends on whether you think the human kind is noble or not, whether or not man is inherently something to be valued in and of himself. Because The idea that really crops up, the political idea of the last 100 years has been the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay, whether that appears in socialism or communism or even in democracy, frankly. And what's missing there is that there's always going to be individuals who are not part of the majority, right? They're not going to be part of the greater good. What about their value? Okay, what about their value? So this is you've really put your finger on the kind of the bedrock debate about whether or not we should value humans in and of themselves, for sure.
You're probably familiar, Gabriel, going back to H.G. Wells, that he wrote an outline of history, which was, as we can imagine, extremely pessimistic. But it had a pushback from Christian intellectuals of the day, such as Hilaire Belloc, G.K. Chesterton. And in fact, I think they publicly debated him here in London back in the 1920s. So there's nothing sort of new in this, but obviously their take on it was, as you say, one which was faith infused and one which was, if you like, positive ultimately about the human condition, that it could be, to use the Christian expression, redeemed, whereas Wells came from a very, very different perspective. Huxley and Orwell have influenced the debate, but in some ways I tend to think that both of them influenced the 1960s more than perhaps their own generation. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the people in the 1950s, of course. And when they were reading 1984, you can imagine, for example, Americans in suburbia in the 1950s, kind of peak Americana, total optimism. The war is over. This is our century now. And you can imagine them reading 1984 and just like, what? Why would I want to read this, right? We have so many awesome things happening. And so I think you're right that it would take, and especially because these writers were so prescient, there was nothing like, right, the TV surveillance or something like this in 1984. You couldn't really see that. That was just oh, that's a crazy idea, isn't it? So you're right. It would take until the 60s and beyond for this technology to really develop and for this to actually become a threat. So yeah, as many science fiction writers were, they were certainly ahead of their time. Brave New World, especially, is just a really bizarre read. You can read it in 2025 and still, like, what are we doing? We're modifying embryos. That's how the book starts. We're modifying embryos to have different desires, and then we're psychologically conditioning them to have certain preferences. And that's just the beginning of this bizarre world. It's a really crazy world that we haven't even seen yet. Like, we haven't even begun to see some of the things mentioned in Brave New World. So yes, it would take some time for this to develop, and really the last 50, 60 years, we are living in a completely different world from the people before us, at a really fundamental level.
At what point do you think that that change happened? I mean, I think it happened in my lifetime, and I'm trying. I mean, a number of dates have been put forward. The beginning of the smartphone or the start of the internet. But in your research and your knowledge in this area, can you sort of give a moment when you think that the scales tipped in one direction and we headed off into this dystopian that we're now heading towards?
Yeah, I think I'd be more interested, honestly, to hear your thoughts on the matter, Sean. I think for me, you put your finger on a couple things: the smartphone, the internet, where people are now really spending most of their time sitting in front of a screen, looking at a phone, listening to things on their phone, and they're really not engaging with people. We have this serious loneliness crisis in the world, especially in the West, where people are just not talking to each other. They just spend their entire days in their apartments, in their flats, in their houses. They don't go out and do things. They don't actually watch events. They have their phone up the entire time recording the event. It is, yeah, maybe the smartphone, right? Because when the smartphone arises, we also have the rise of uh, prevalent wireless internet. Is also a thing. So you're never in a spot really where you can't access the internet, and it has certainly replaced our interactions with each other. And that's something that's, by the way, these early dystopian writers, they couldn't imagine. They could not really picture just how prevalent the internet would be, or wireless communications that are transmitting so much of this data. Because yeah, it certainly has altered our life, and not the least of which is our privacy, because we're transmitting our location at any given time, and because we have access to Facebook and Instagram and whatever else at our fingertips, we're just revealing way too much information that we probably shouldn't be revealing. And these companies encourage us to do that. They have dark patterns that are baked into their apps where they manipulate you. They try to get you to do certain things, and they have entire psychologists, groups of psychologists within their companies to make sure that they're getting the most out of you. And it's a pretty scary world. But yeah, I guess 15 years ago, the iPhone is released. That would certainly be a good date to put our finger on. But I would certainly be interested in your thoughts as well.
Well, I mean, I think that there's something in it, the idea of the consumer turning us into the ultimate consumer is seems to be the pattern. But I think this predates the internet, predates our time. I mean, if you think of how the thoughts of Sigmund Freud, for example, were deployed on Madison Avenue by Bernays and others. They were already playing with human psychology to turn us from ordinary and free citizens into consumers. That was the aim. Um, but do you see a larger sort of plan here? I mean, there's one thing to have companies which want to increase their profit line, want to get as many people consuming their product. I understand that. That's the nature of business. But do you see something sort of more fundamentally wrong in all of this? I mean, you alluded to the loneliness epidemic, which is obvious to many in this society that we live in. Would you say that there is something else at work here, something maybe more nefarious, which is ultimately robbing us of what it is to be human?
If you look at the world we live in, where you have Western countries, for example, that have birth rates that even if it were to turn around today, they would still have serious extinction on the radar, right? Serious problems in the West, also East Asia. If you look at how much, as you say, we're consuming, how much we're addicted to the screens in front of us, these things that have been designed to attract our attention like moths to a flame. If you look at the world we live in, it would be very tempting to look at that and say, if I were a psychopathic head of some secret organization in the world, this is the world that I would create. And I would do this and I would do that. And I would have this outrage on the internet where, and actually, Sean, I'm thinking of writing a book or maybe a series of books, putting myself in the position of this kind of person, right? And what would I do? Well, I would have people on social media, and then I would have fake accounts that are saying this and saying that and building outrage, right? And robbing people really of their free will by encouraging them to think about far off places and far off conflicts and outraged over this thing and that thing. There's so much power at the fingertips of somebody if they were pulling the levers, and we can just see that everywhere we look. Whether or not that is the case, I'm still investigating, but I certainly am open to the possibility. And maybe if I put myself in the shoes of this person when I write one of these novels, maybe I will kind of put the pieces together. So far, I have not been able to do so, and therefore, it seems to me just a collection of unfortunate events by some bad actors and some people who are just steering us in an unfruitful direction. So that's my current line of thinking on the subject.
Interesting. Interesting. So, I mean, has your sort of quest for privacy and concerns around personal security, has this caused you to reject society in a sense?
I wouldn't say reject society. It has allowed me to unplug from certain things. For example, the rat race. Okay. I have been self employed. Ever since I had this awakening, I've been self employed. I cannot simply go and work for a company that I don't believe in and whose values I don't have. Um, I found a way to make my own money, be self-employed. I think that was a real cool thing, so that I can just have an interview with you without having to be at work or something, right? So that allows me to have more free thinking. I can explore more things. I have more time at my fingertips. Um, so I have rejected that in a sense. I do reject certain social and cultural norms that you're supposed to do this or you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to buy these certain things. Obviously, I've I've read and I've watched all of the good stuff on these subjects. Fight Club, for example, I'm aware of the assault on masculinity, the dropping testosterone levels of men, which is a huge consequence on the world. So I'm aware of these things. And yes, being in this kind of skeptical mindset, which is really the root of my privacy interests, has not only protected me. Not only do I wake up and I start up my operating system that is not surveying me, and I use my software that I know is not surveying me, but I also see a different view of life. When I'm not using Google products, I'm using something like Brave Search or even something like Yandex or a Google alternative. I literally do see a different slice of the world. And I certainly have the ability to see things differently and research things differently. And I have not broken away from society, but I do have the ability to stand back on a regular basis and see things at a different angle because I have the time, because I have the self-awareness that of what's going on, right? And I also have the technological tools to see this different slice of reality or see this different dimension of things.
If you're able to, when was the moment that you suddenly realized? What was that epiphany moment that you realized you had to live differently?
I don't think it was an epiphany. I think for me, the podcasting era was really important because suddenly I could hear heretical things that were being espoused that didn't have to be approved by the radio waves. And so I was listening to, I think it was first I was very left leaning, and then I listened to some conservative stuff. I just never heard like the conservative argument for things, and that was very revealing for me. And then I went on this path towards libertarianism, and then of course I found myself on the funnest parts of the internet. And so the podcasting era was really influential in over the course of a few years, just kind of challenging the narratives and realizing that, hey, the mass media is not necessarily good, right? They phrase things in certain ways, even at even when they're at their best, that is misleading, disingenuous. And of course, I've traveled the many dark and very interesting parts of the internet. So I've heard a lot of the theories, and I investigate things. So for me, it was a gradual path that I think anybody can take. And if people are listening to this, they've probably already taken that path. But yeah, for me, it wasn't an epiphany. It was just a gradual pursuit of truth, which led me down various pathways. Um, yeah, various useful pathways that have simply enhanced my understanding. I think of things like I'm adding Venn diagrams to my life. Okay, in the past, maybe I had communist sympathies. I jettisoned a lot of that, but there's something there. Like I get something from having read the Marxist critiques of consumerism, for example. I can take that with me, that little part of the Venn diagram. I can add libertarianism to that, and it actually there's something in common. And then I can add this, and then this kind of conspiratorial thing, and I can add these things to the point where, in the end, I feel like I have a more of a holistic sense of things. And certainly, it is not what they teach you in school. That is what the end result is.
You described yourself as a skeptic, Gabriel. I mean, skepticism is fine in small doses, you could say, but as a life philosophy, it can be equally as depressing as the dystopian ones. I mean, would you say that hope is part of your life, or are you basically pessimistic about where we're heading as a society?
Well, I don't like what I see on the horizon, but I'm not pessimistic. And what I have done is I think at a certain point you really have to dig your heels in and say you stand for certain things. So yes, I'm not just questioning everything, skeptical of everything. I do believe in certain things, and I have developed a little bit of a conservatism over the years. And I think family is great. I think that Western civilization is amazing. I don't want to flee it necessarily, like maybe I did in past years. And I do think that I can have some kind of influence on the world. And so these are all good developments. I'm not pessimistic, and I think that there's a really good line by our friend Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher. He says that if you think the world is such a terrible place and that you would be better off if you were not in it, well, then there is a solution. And of course, that's not a solution, right? That's not something people want to do. Therefore, they do believe that they can affect the world. They can change the world. And it starts with just changing yourself and starting by doing things that people have done for thousands of years. Eat good, real food, not this fake food that people are offering you. Have a family. Have get in touch with the religion of your ancestors that got us here. All these sorts of things are good things. And by the way, I think that they're fundamental. The more freedom you want, this is one of the ironies that I've realized recently. The more freedom that you want, the more you really have to have some conservative boundaries within your society, because endless freedom is hedonism. That is not, and that's not free. That's enslaving in and of itself. We have to have a baseline. We have to have a civilization that our ancestors had in order to have some of these freedoms. So that's kind of where I am at the moment, philosophically and politically.
Very interesting. Nothing particularly new in that, though. I mean, the people for many, many centuries have been saying the bedrock of society is family, is self-employment, is private property, hard work, industry, self-independence as much as you can, and as little of the state as possible. So these aren't particularly new. Do you see, I mean, I see, for example, in the generation a lot younger than me, a kind of resurgence of interest in a lot of these ideas that certainly seemed old hat in the 1960s. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you're right that what I've just espoused is absolutely nothing at all. Now that you put it like that, nothing at all new. However, we've certainly gone through a phase in the 21st century so far where all these things are unpopular, right? They're not popular. You're supposed to be single. You're supposed to be childless. You're supposed to put your career first, and all these sorts of things. I do see a resurgence of people pushing back against that. Maybe that's my echo chamber speaking again, but I think that there's a little bit of that. It needs to be more, and it needs to happen more quickly. I do think that if Western societies don't change very quickly, that it's going to be a really serious problem. But yes, I do see a resurgence of that, and I do see people who it's the old thing, right? Soft times breed hard people, and hard times, I'm butchering it, but you get the idea. And we've had some really soft times of the last 50 years. The last few generations, especially in the West, have had very few wars, very few obstacles of any kind, and it really made a soft people, right? Soft times make soft people. It really made some soft people, and the struggles of the last maybe few years, last couple of decades, I think the economic crises that are coming up are really going to breed some hard people, and maybe unfortunately that's the only kind of scenario where we can have a more robust defense, conservative defense of what got us here. So we'll see how this plays out. But yes, I do see some more of this coming. That is some more of the healthy mindset of humanity, the mindset that's not self-effacing, and the positivism or the optimism in just being human and traditional things. I do see more of that, and we're going to need a lot more than we currently have as well.
Is there anywhere on the face of the earth that you would point to as a kind of beacon for freedom, somewhere where you would suggest it's probably a good country to think about? I mean, going and living there, it's got greater freedoms than perhaps some of those in the West.
I don't think so. I have long explored and I've participated in many seminars of internationalization. And the thing that I've developed especially in the last couple of years, that really turned me off of that is that the concept of freedom, the concept of many of the concepts that are cherished in the West, these don't exist elsewhere. They really don't. They don't. And that's something that I've really delved deeply into with one of my favorite people who I've interviewed on my show, Giant Bandari, who talks about the third world, and really drew my attention to the fact that if the West does not succeed, then there's going to be problems because there's really no alternative. He points to East Asia as places where these people have high civilizational values. They do have certain crackdowns on certain things, so freedom is not necessarily the highest priority in places like Japan, etc. But he spent time in China, and he actually says controversial things like there's more freedom in China than the West. I think he's being provocative, but there is certainly a reflection in that on how we've strayed away from our values in the West. But I'm more inclined to want to hunker down and try to fix things here, because what you have to have is a people, a rational people who believe in these things, who have a tradition of these things. Because yes, you can go to Panama. Yes, you can go to Uruguay. Yes, you can get your residency in Mexico and spend time there and kind of be off the grid. But at a fundamental level, these people don't really believe in the things that made the West what it is. So you're really just buying time, and you're really just carving out this pocket, right? This little pleasure center in Aldous Huxleyan terms, that is hiding from the real world. And if we want to make changes in the real world, we need to do that in the only place where freedom and these values have existed, and that's the West.
Is there something in what you're questing for, Gabriel, which is not achievable on a kind of communal societal level, but something which is kind of like an inner freedom? We've talked a lot about societal changes and dystopias, etc. But there's always been people in history who have stood out against whatever the prevailing trends are. And they often have a very clear sense of who they are and what their destiny is. Do you think there's something about ultimately all of this external noise will drive us to a sort of to explore what is at the very core of each human being?
That's quite a question. I have a few thoughts on that. First of all, yes, I think that ultimately freedom is an internal value, right? Jean Paul Sartre says that even the man in prison can have complete freedom, right? Freedom to respond to whatever situation that he's in. And Jean Paul Sartre has a good line. He says, "You're always free to make yourself out of what you've been made into." Now that's powerful, and I want to cultivate that, and I want to reflect on what the Stoics, the ancient Stoics, thought. For example, Epictetus says that wealth does not consist in having great possessions, but in having few wants. There's a lot of wisdom in these things, and yet I don't want that to breed a complacency within me, because it's also true that I don't want to live in prison, and I don't want to be a slave like Epictetus was, and I don't want to live in a very much degraded society. So I do want to take that inner freedom, cultivate that, but also have a righteous indignation to alter the course of the places that I'm in and get it on the right track, so that it's a lot easier to cultivate that inner freedom when it is also being expressed by external freedom.
Yeah, I think the two go hand in hand somehow. I mean, the man who's truly, or the woman who's truly free, no state can oppress. Whereas, as you hinted at the start, so many people are almost willing their servitude. That's the strange thing, no?
It is. You're right. There's a really cool book by the former Navy SEAL Jocko Willink, and it's called "Discipline Equals Freedom." And it's this eternal struggle that, of course, everybody talks about freedom, right? The Marxists talk about freedom. Read the Communist Manifesto. Freedom is the main theme of the Communist Manifesto. What does freedom mean, though? That's the real question. Freedom is not just unrestrained doing whatever you want. If you follow that path, you're going to be overweight in no time. You're going to have debilitating physical problems, and you're not going to have cultivated the things that, through discipline, through restraint, okay, through suppression of freedom, that would actually make you free later on. So that's where we need to have a time horizon that is oriented at the future, because freedom is a complex thing, and it's something that we need to grapple with, and it's not something that is just, as I said, unrestrained appetite. That is not freedom. That is actually enslavement.
So, Gabriel, the picture you've painted is one where we should be more concerned about our personal security online and also our privacy in the world. I mean, like you, I'm slightly aghast when people are giving away so much of their private details on Facebook, Twitter, and all the rest. Um, but a lot of people would say to me, well, that's just the way of the world. They can't do anything about it. So, what practical advice would you give anybody who's listening to this, who's thinking, wait a minute, I've heard what Gabriel said, and I need to check out where I am and maybe look at some aspects of that? What would you recommend to somebody listening to this tonight?
Yes, in terms of the people who think that why does privacy matter? We're already giving up our stuff. It's too late. As I said, Jean Paul Sartre says it's never too late. First of all, to make yourself out of what you've been made into. Okay, so only the lazy person says that, oh, it's too late. That is a lazy defeatist attitude. And if that's what you want, then you'll have to live with those consequences. When people bring this up, though, why does it matter? All this kind of stuff. I I sometimes agree with them these days. I'll say, okay, you're absolutely right. That makes my job as my secondary job as an open source intelligence gatherer even easier. Okay, you want to give up all your information? Great. I can see where you work. I can do some searches. I can see where you live. You know, other people, more nefarious people, will, if you say something naughty online, use that to dox you. In other words, say, hey, this person said this. This is where they live. Okay, pretty simple stuff. I can find out what you downloaded potentially. I can find out what you're interested in. I can have a portfolio that could, in many ways, destroy you in any number of ways. So if that's what you want, then by all means do that. It makes my secondary job as an investigator even easier. I can track you down. I can do all sorts of things. I could, if I were nefarious, find out through many data breaches that you've willingly given your information. I can find out your email address. I can find out the name of your wife. I can find out some other personal information. I could send you an email pretending to be your bank and say, hey, you need to log in and change your password, so that when you click on that link, you will go to my website that I've created where I steal your password and I steal your funds, and you become part of the statistic of $10 trillion of cybercrime. So if that's really what you want, by all means, that makes my life easier. And that makes the infinite amount of scammers around the world who are stealing money every day, that makes their job much easier as well. And by the way, when you do that, one of the biggest hacking groups in the world is in North Korea. So when you fall victim to them, not only are you losing your money, not only are you having your PayPal account dinged and your bank account dinged and your crypto exchange funds emptied, you're actually funding the death of North Koreans every day. So if you want to live with that, by all means, go for it. Now, I say I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a part of that. And so the first thing to realize is that there are alternatives to all the things that we do. We don't really have to be on social media. We certainly don't have to post personal things of our ID card, certainly, or anything that can come back to bite us. So just be cognizant of what you're putting out into the world. I also say this: privacy loss is about giving up our information. So when I go to the mechanic, I pay in cash and I don't give out any information. Maybe I'll have a phone number in the back of my mind that goes to the Denver Public Library, for example, if I have to give out information. So what I know when I go to the mechanic is that they're going to take my information, they're going to put it onto a computer system that gets uploaded to some company that promises it's going to protect your data. It's not. It's going to get breached. It's going to be leaked. They have hundreds of employees that themselves are all vulnerable. They could theoretically be paid off, all these sorts of things. So I expect every piece of information that I put out on the internet to come back to bite me. So first of all, I don't give it out so freely. I use alternative services that allow me to have multiple emails, like Proton Mail, for example. When I'm using a computer, I always have a virtual private network on, a VPN. One of the ones that I like is called Mullvad. So I always have that on when I'm using a computer. That way, my internet service provider can't see what I'm doing. So I'm just thinking about the way that I'm leaking data in so many ways, and I find ways to tamp that down. And you can be subtle about that. You can go slow. And along the way, you're going to realize that there's even more that you can do. But it begins with realizing what you're exposing and then choosing not to give it out and finding alternative services instead of the always online Microsoft Office 365 on your desktop. Maybe you download an offline piece of software that isn't surveying you, that isn't uploading all of your data to the cloud, which can be compromised. And by the way, they also censor you sometimes based on hate speech, according to the Microsoft terms of service. So I'm looking for alternatives all the time. And when I look up at my desktop right now, I have mostly software that is offline that I don't have to pay for. I can send them a donation if I want, and therefore it doesn't require an account to use. So I'm not giving out information. I'm not transmitting my data back to the mothership. I'm always looking for alternatives. So that's kind of the baseline. Sean. So happy to pivot in whatever direction you want.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. Um, what sort of reaction do you get? I mean, you have a podcast, the Watchmen Privacy Podcast. Just tell us a little bit about what the sort of remit of that is, in case anybody was interested.
Yeah, I think I think I make a good show. In fact, my colleague who helps me with that was saying the other day that he he admitted, he's like, I can't listen to other shows now because what we're doing is so interesting. So we talk about privacy all kinds of privacy topics. We do it in a holistic way. We do it in a non-arrogant way. This is okay if you're not tech savvy. We talk about all the sorts of way that you expose yourself. In your car, okay, people don't realize that your vehicle, especially post 2015, if you connect your phone, it sucks up all of the data on your phone by and large. People don't realize that phones have microphones built into them. So we basically tackle all of the ways that we're exposing ourselves holistically, physical privacy, digital privacy, and then we show you solutions. And then we talk about how we can have amazing things in the digital world. We talk about the Internet Archive was recently taken down. We talk about how you could do that yourself. So we have some really cool ideas and projects for not only how we can escape the surveillance grid, but how we can use the tools and technology to also have more freedom, more things at our fingertips to actually access the riches of the internet as well. So it's a really eclectic show. We talk philosophy regularly. We talk philosophy. We talk internationalization. We talk privacy, cybersecurity. We talk video games. My colleague is a video game developer. So we run the gamut. We talk about cultural things as well. It's a really eclectic show, but in the end, what we're really funneling people towards is better understanding the world and having the tools at your fingertips to make sure that you're not part of this surveillance grid and the other apparatuses that are restraining your freedom, the technocracy, as we call it.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you, Gabriel, if a little bit alarming at the same time. Tell people where they can find out more about your thought and your ideas around privacy. I know you have a number of websites, right?
Yes, the simplest thing, though, for people to do is go to your local podcast player or YouTube or whatever video player, search for Watchmen Privacy. Just give it a listen. It's a free show. Go back into the archives, check it out. If you want to take immediate action, go to Amazon. You can check out my book, The Watchmen Guide to Privacy. If you just do one of those two things, Watchmen Privacy Podcast, you'll certainly find your way to my other websites when the time is right.
Well, Gabriel, it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible. And I hope you will come back and speak to us again about this topic, which is not going to disappear anytime soon.
Business is good in dystopia land, so happy to do so.
Thank you very much, Gabriel.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.